What's up, Katie Baz, and welcome back to the channel. This week this is going to be a pattern and sewing tutorial for a nightgown. This nightgown is going to be cut on a bias. It has lace trims on the neckline and on the hemline, so it's a very beautiful, delicate design. I will be showing you guys how to create the sewing patterns using your own measurement. This was something that we live streamed last week, but I edited down the recorded session. I showed you guys how to cut, how to stitch, and how to make any changes in case you have some gaping happening on the neckline of your nightgown. So if you'd like to see how I created this nightgown from scratch, make sure to keep on watching. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoy it, and let's get into this tutorial. So starting from this edge, I'm just going to go in and draw my long vertical line. This is going to become my center front, and that edge I'll most likely cut on a fold. I say the ability to get straight lines when you're doing pattern is like a superpower, because the moment you just get one line wrong, everything goes sideways. The first line I'm going to mark is 4 inches downwards. Now this is going to be the distance from the neckline to the bust line. 4 inches downwards like this. I'm going to do that here. Now from that point downwards, I'm going to mark the vertical distance from my bust to my waist. Mine is 6 inches, so I'm just going to go in here and mark it like so. From my waistline, I am going to mark the distance from my waist to my hip. This is 10 inches for me. I highly recommend you work with your measurements so you get the best fit for you. And then I'm going to mark my entire nightgown length. So I'm going to make mine 30 inches. So I'm going in here to square these points across. So squaring across just means drawing a line that is perpendicular to the center front line. Or our like first line neckline now, and I'm going to be marking half of my across chest. That I'm going to be marking on this top part here. Mine is 12, so I'm going to be marking half of that, which is 6. I'm going to mark that here, and I'm going to come down to my bust line. I'm going to mark a quarter of my bust measurement plus, I'll say half an inch ease. So I'm going to mark 9.5 here along the bust line. So that's bust line divided by 4 plus half an inch ease. Right, so moving on to the waistline, I'm going to divide my waistline by 4 and add half an inch ease. I'll round it up to 8. And then along my hip, I'm going to mark quarter of my hip measurement divided by 4. My mom would be proud. My total hem width is 48, so that way it kind of goes out a little bit, but not too much. If it were to be a line, it would literally just flare out from the bust all the way down to the hem, but the people wanted bias cut, and that is what we're doing. All right, so I am going to go in here and mark 12. Then I'm going to connect all of these points together to give me the shape of my nightgown. I'm just connecting my side points together, like I'm just drawing it down here by like 1 inch, because I don't want it to be a point from here to here. So the grain is going to be like that. let me just say along bias, so I'm reminded when I'm cutting as well. The first change I want to make is I want to add a dot on the front arm curve. I'm going to mark half of that here. And then I want to go in and draw a diagonal line that is somewhat halfway along this my front arm curve. And then the dot is 1 inch wide here, 1 inch, so half an inch on both sides. Most likely have it stop, I'll say half an inch before the bust point, or even 1 inch. So if I'm not a fan of having dots go all the way to the bust point, and I feel like you lose some measurements when you stitch a dot into either the bust point or the hip point. Let's go in and draw that in place. I see the chat going off. I promise I will come and read your comments. Let me just do this dot quickly. I'm going to change up my neckline. I'm just going to connect this to that. The bust line is already there, so I don't need to think much about where this is. Okay, so that's the front all done. Let's get some annotations in there. That's the center front, bust, waist, hip, the hem. And I'm just going to go in to trace off parts that I need. Let me start off with the center back because the ruler is already there. I'm just going to add some tape. Just trace that. So I'm tracing off the center front to this new sheet of paper. This is going to become my center back. Then trace off the hemline. The hemline is the same on the front and on the back, except if you want like an asymmetric situation where the back of your nightgown is longer than the front, then this is the point where you make that change. And because we've already added the seam allowance on the front, I don't have to think about that for the back. I'm just literally tracing along the seam allowance line. So my back nightgown pattern has seam allowance included. So I have reached the arm curve area, and here I want it to be shallower. So I'm going to draw in the back arm curve that goes from this point to that point. Let's grab that there. And we come back here. So I think I would have it curve down to about here and then draw it straight from the back edge here. That's what I'll do. So let's curve it down. And then connect it so it's actually accurate. Right, drawing the rest of there. This becomes my center back edge. And then let's not forget our bias grain. Because like the last time I went and I drew it straight. Oh, my brain. My brain, oh. So I'm going to go across the side seams and transfer some notches. I'm going to transfer the notch for the waistline, the notch for the hip. So the back is going to be cut in this fold as well. And there we have it. These are the main patterns done. With the pattern all done, I'm going to go ahead to cut and stitch my nightgown all together. I have my main front and back nightgown pieces, which I'm going to be cutting on a bias. The fabric I'm going to be using is this blue satin fabric that has such a nice fall. I also got a cream lace trim that I'm going to be putting on the neckline and on the hemline of the dress. I went ahead of camera to make my own bias tape using the fabric. I have a separate video showing how to do this, so you were able to create bias tapes from the same fabric that you want to sew with. This I'm going to be using for finishing my arm curve and making my shoulder straps. Now if you've watched so far and you haven't given this video a like, please do so now. It helps my videos and my channel perform a whole lot better on YouTube. Now moving on to cutting the nightgown, I have my fabric laid out here, and the selvage is what you can see on the bottom of the screen. Now I'm going to be folding it 45 degrees against the selvage, so you have the fold that looks like this. This way we have a folded edge that I'm going to be matching to the center front or the center back edge of my pattern. That way this piece is going to be cut on a bias, so the bias line should be parallel to the selvage of your fabric if you've laid out everything correctly. Once I have the pattern held down with some weights, that is very important because it moves due to the fact that this fabric is very light. I'm just going in here to cut out my front piece. I went in to cut my back piece as well off the camera, cut my notches indicating where like my waistline, my hip line and the dart points are for my arm curve, and these are all of the pieces I ended up with. I just have one piece for my front and one piece for my back. They are both cut in a fold and both cut on a bias, so it fell really and skims really beautifully on the body. Now moving on to sewing the nightgown itself, the first thing I'm going to be working on is the darts on the arm curve on the front. I'm just going in here to transfer the dart points using a pin from the pattern paper onto the fabric. Then I'm going to be marking those exact points with a chalk. Now once I have the point marked, I'm going to take off the pattern and then just pin the darts along that arm curve. That way it guides me when I take this piece to my machine, and I know exactly how much I am stitching, where my stitch is starting from and where it's ending. Sewing with a normal straight stitch, I'm just going in here to stitch off this side of the darts. I went ahead to repeat the same thing on the other side of the nightgown, and this is what the front piece is looking like. I'm going to be joining the side seams together, but I'm going to be doing this French seam style. And what this essentially means is you would need to sew with wrong sides together first on half of whatever your seam allowance is, and then you go back in and stitch again with right sides together, so you have a situation whereby you have a nicely beautifully finished seam on the inside and on the outside of the dress. And this is a great seam to use when you use very lightweight fabrics like satin, silks, chiffon, because if you overlock it, I find that it adds a lot of weight to the seam allowance of a very fine fabric such as this one that I'm using here. So I'm just going to repeat the same thing on this seam and on the other seam of the dress, give it a nice press, and this is what it looks like. It's already coming together really beautifully. The next thing I'm going to work on is the neckline of the nightgown. Now you can skip this particular step or you can use a bias binding for this step, but basically I'm just rolling the neckline and stitching it down in a very slim edge stitch like so. So when I add my lace trim, it looks tidy even on the inside as well. Now I tried it on and realized that the neckline was gaping on the front and on the back, and I didn't want to keep that. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put right sides together and I'm going to add a small dart on the center back and on the center front. You can keep this feature in because if the fabric is nice and flowy, it will most likely fall like in a cowl neckline style. But if you want to get rid of that, darts are usually like my go-to method of getting rid of gaping along neckline. You can add a dart, you can add a little gathering, make it like a feature rather than have it discourage you if it's something that you didn't want initially. So I'm just marking in the dart like so. It's about 1.5 inch wide total like stitch away, and then the height of the dart is about 2 inches. So this I repeated on the front and on the back, and I'm going to go in now to add the lace trim, which I actually cut down from an existing lace trim I already had. So this is half of a whole lace trim. I just like the scalloped edges, and I'm going to be pinning it down starting from this center front point. Then I'm going to go in to pin the other side, so the left and the right hand side of the neckline for the front at this point. I just like to add pins so that way I know, or I have an idea of how the lace trim is going to look once it's stitched in place. And this is the point where you can play around with the placement of your lace trim. I just wanted that symmetry, so I have a piece that is right in the middle, and then the other ones sort of like go towards the side. Now this I'm only going to do for the front, and I'm going to be sewing along the curved edges because I want it to look like it's actually part of the material of the nightgown. I'm going to repeat the same thing on the hemline, leaving the scalloped full beautiful edges at the bottom so it looks like that is part of the material, even though this is a trim that I am adding at this point. I'm going to be sewing along the curved edges on top, along the hemline of the nightgown, and when I get to the edge I would overlap the ends of the lace trim so they meet each other nicely. Don't forget to like this video if you're enjoying it so far, and subscribe and join the KDVAS fam if you haven't already. So I'm just going to finish off this part of the lace trim is being stitched onto the neckline of the nightgown. I'm going to essentially repeat the same thing in the same manner for the hemline. That took me a little bit of time, but it is so satisfactory when you get it done correctly. Now I went to the middle point of my front neckline and I stitched it in sort of a triangular shape. So I took away the excess that was at that middle point, and I'm just going to fold back the stitched up edge of that lace end, and I'm going to sew it down flat against one side of the lace trim along the neckline. Now this is what the piece is looking like so far. I really am glad I went with the cream lace trim against this fabric. It just created a very delicate and feminine look that I loved. And I'm going to work on the arm curve, and I'm grabbing one piece of my bias tape. The total length of this thing is 30 inches, so I'm going to use it to finish the arm curve, and I'm pinning one side of the tape folded out like so. The plan is to sew it like this first and then go in and roll the other side against that seam to conceal it, and then continue that stitch upwards to make the shoulder strap. Now this is what it looks like. I'm just going to take it, fold it over, and hide that seam inside, and make sure that it covers the seam that I made earlier on. And I'm going to be sewing ever so slightly against the edge. There were certain points that I even missed and I had to go back in to stitch again. So it's one of those parts that you don't want to rush, you just want to take your time with. Once I reached the end of the arm curve, I continued sewing upwards. This I did for this side, and when I reached the edge of the tape I just folded it in to finish off the nightgown. I repeated the same thing for the other side, gave my nightgown a nice press, and this is what it looks like. I just love how feminine it looks. I love the color, I love the fit, I love the feel of the fabric as well. I think the fabric definitely contributed to the success of this piece. I ended up using about 1.5 meters of fabric. You can make yours longer or shorter if you would like, but if you enjoy this project, please give this video a thumbs up. It helps my channel a lot. Leave your thoughts, comments and ideas down below, and if you'll be recreating this, please tag me on social media at Kimdave Designs. And until next time, have a good morning, afternoon and evening wherever you are. Bye.